Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Flutter Day SSA. Um, Welcome to Flutter Day SSA, and glad to have you here. Um, Flutter Day SSA is brought to you by a combination of GDGs and Flutter communities spread across Sub-Saharan Africa. And shout out to GDG Johannesburg, GDG Lagos, Flutter Kisumu, and Flutter Lagos, GDG Kisumu, and Flutter Developers Kenya. Today we have John Ryan on the John is a developer programs engineer for Dart and Flutter at Google, and he's joined us today to talk about Flutter. John will be answering questions about Flutter and then talking about building forms in Flutter. Yeah, so next up is John. John, are you there?
I'm backstage. There I am. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. How's it over there today?
It's good weather. I just want to say, first off, everyone, if you're sheltering at home, I hope you are staying safe, and I hope things are working all right if you're working from home.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, safety first is super important, especially during the times that we're in right now. So John, do you want to take it away? Give us a little bit of background intro, and then just take it away.
Yeah, so I started at Google about a year ago, and I am a developer programs engineer, which means I am very interested in what types of use cases you all are building and what types of apps you are building with Flutter, or even programs you're writing with Dart that aren't Flutter. So if you want to share what you're doing in the chat, I'd be happy to take a look at that. I'm always very curious what you guys are actually doing. So today I would like to talk about building forms, and I want to walk through building an app with you guys and just show some basic concepts of what you need if you're building a form, some things to think about. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And can you guys all see that? There we go. I'll just present these slides. So the first thing I want to point out here, we do have a slide.do link. If you want to post your questions there, we'll have a Q&A after the session. And that's all I have for that. I'm John, and I work at Google. So I work on the Flutter team, and Flutter is all about giving you the tools to build apps for mobile web and desktop from a single code base. And one of the things that makes Flutter unique is that we do all the rendering directly to the screen. So we render the pixels ourselves. And for other talks on that, I recommend checking out our website. There's a lot of good details on how this works. But for me, when I use Flutter, I expect and I get fast development. Everything feels really composable. Everything is a widget. Everything is customizable, which we'll see a little bit in this talk when we customize some form widgets. And Flutter runs really fast. So if you compile it for iOS or Android, it runs great. And we're working on improving the performance on web, and it runs fast on desktop today. It's used by a lot of developers. I see we have at least 5 or 6 communities coming together. So once you start using Flutter, join a community, check out your local Flutter meetup, join it, and find other people, figure out what they're doing, and learn from them, learn from each other. IDE support is super important for us. We have a really great tooling story with DevTools, which we saw on the live stream today or last night. If you're in the US, it's free and open source. So if you're interested in writing code that is very open and free to use and free to modify, free to change, and that's something that's important to you, Flutter is open source. So you can make pull requests. Our issue tracker is open source. And the same is true for Dart. So if you're writing Dart programs, Dart is also open source. Okay, so let's talk about forms. So the first thing I want to get you to think about is maybe I don't need a form, right? So here's a sign-in form for an app. This is an extra step for users. I actually have to go into my keyboard. I have to type in an email address, type in a password, and then I hit the sign-in button. And that's like 3 extra steps that the user has to do. And these days, there's great support if you're using Firebase to do Firebase authentication and add a sign in with Google button to your app. And that all works in Flutter today. So I really want to recommend that if you don't need a form, then don't use one. But sometimes you do need a form. And I think of a form as just something that gets information from a user, something they input into the phone, and hopefully your app that you're building provides the user with a service. So you're doing something with that information, and you're getting something back. You're actually servicing the user somehow. So today I want to talk about just how to think about generally app design, right? So in this talk, we're going to be going from a design and we're going to build a prototype, all in Flutter in hopefully 30 minutes, so we have time for questions. So let's talk about design. So let's say I have an idea for a climbing app. The first thing that I would do is I would write down who I am actually having in mind when I'm designing my app. Who are the personas that I'm thinking of when I think of someone using my app? So if I'm building a climbing app, climbing is all about going outdoors, going to the gym. And this person, Sarah, climbs outdoors. She climbs in the gym and she uses Android. So that already tells me I need to probably think about building an Android app. And if I have another persona that uses iOS, maybe I should consider using Flutter to prototype this app. Some use cases. So going from a persona to a use case. So thinking about what would this user actually want to use the app? What are the journeys that the user goes through to achieve their goal? So this app, I want Sarah wants to view her previous climbs, and she wants to add new climbs to the app. So she essentially wants to track what she's doing in her sport. So let's look at another use case real quick. Greg is a more competitive person. So I'm thinking of someone that wants to view other users' climbs maybe and like compare himself to other people. That's just who he is and that's what he values. So that generates new use cases. But for this app, we're just going to build a quick prototype. And the reason you build a prototype is so you can actually get something into the hands of users. You can actually test things out and see what users actually like and don't like. So this app, we're going to be viewing all the climbs that the user enters, and we're going to be creating new climbs, and we're going to edit existing climbs. And you might have guessed already that creating a climb and editing a climb, we're going to use a form. We're going to use a form to do that. So if you want, you can actually clone this repository and follow along. So what I did here is I added the different steps as commits, and I'll be doing this on stream. You don't have to worry about following along, but if you want to and you want to poke around in the code, certainly feel free to do that. That's what it's all about. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing that I think about when I build an app is I try to think about what are the different objects in my app, in my domain for this app. And this is a climbing app, so users want to track climbs. So I'm going to have some climb object, and that climb has another object called a grade. And what a grade is in climbing is the difficulty. So we'll get more into that in a second. So let's get started. Let's add some package dependencies that we're going to need. We'll run pub get, or Flutter packages get. And now we've got our dependencies. So we want to create our climb class. So here I've decided that there's a name, there's a grade, and a date. And the grade is another class that I'm going to be writing. So grading in climbing looks like this. There's different grading systems. So in my app, there's a little bit of complexity, or there's a constraint around this that I need to deal with. And so a 5.8 is generally a good beginner climb. In the United States, it's a 5.8. That's the Yosemite decimal system. In France, for example, they use the French numerical system a lot. So we want both users who may be in different countries. Maybe my persona for one user, Sarah, is in France and Greg is in the United States. So we need to support both. So to do this, I have a grade class. And what that does is it allows you to construct a grade using one grading system or the other. So there's these two constructors here. And I also want to print out the string, and I want to be able to convert these grades to other grades. So I've got this two-type method. I've left out the implementation here just for simplicity. I also have a grade type enumeration object. And that's it. So we've got our climb and our grades, and we've got those classes written, maybe written some tests for those. So we're ready to get started displaying a list of tiles before we edit and add these using a form. So to do this, what I did is I wrote a stateless widget that takes a climb object that we just saw, and it has an on tap. So I know when the user taps on this, we might want to show the editing page, for example. And we'll just use a list tile for this. Don't worry about the details here. I'm just using the Untitled package to format the date to a string and also show the human readable grade. And so we'll build this using a list view builder. What's nice about list view builder is if you have hundreds and hundreds of list tiles, for example, in this case, climb tiles, what Flutter does is it virtualizes those for you. So, oops. So what list view builder does is it virtualizes those for you. It only renders what's on screen. And then when you scroll with your finger and view those later, it's going to build those just in time to show those on screen. So I recommend list view builder if you're going to have a lot of items. You don't have to use list view builder if you don't want to. So let's run the app real quick. I've got it running here. So here's my list view. I can tap on these. And I've got a floating action button here. Nothing is wired up yet, so that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so more code. But now we're on to step 3, I think. So we're going to be actually showing a form. So I wrote a little widget for this, and I made it a stateful widget because the state of the form is going to contain the climb that I'm editing, and we'll see more of that in a bit. So I've got this draft object, and what the draft object allows me to do is make changes to this object without necessarily committing those changes to the actual list. So the user can maybe edit the form, start making some changes, and then decide, oh, I don't actually want to change this. I'm going to hit the cancel button. So what I do is I copy the object into a new object that we can let the user edit. And then we just need to set up some layout things. So we're going to use a single child scroll view and a column. You could add a scroll bar if you wanted to. Pretty basic layout stuff here. The important thing I want to call out is we are using this form widget, and we're wrapping everything in this form widget, and that'll be important here in the future steps. So now we've got our form widget set up. We're starting to add form fields to the widget. So we're going to add the text field, in this case, the text form field widget, which is provided by Flutter. And that's going to be our form field for the name. So the user is going to enter a name and hit save, and hopefully it will update the name. So I'm editing the draft name here when the value changes. And I'm setting the initial value to the name of the draft. Okay, so one final thing is we're going to use the same widget for when you're creating a new climb and when you're editing an existing climb. So with the floating action button, we just call edit climb with no object. That'll create a new climb. And if we tap on a climb tile from the list view, we'll call edit climb the same method, and we'll give it an actual object that the user tapped. So we'll look up in our list of climbs that the user has defined here, we'll look up the one that they tapped, and we'll pass it to this page, this form that we're displaying. And that looks something like this. So if no climb was provided, we'll just give them an empty one. If it was provided, we'll pass that. And we're using a material page route to show this form. All right, so let's go there. So git checkout step 3, I think. There we go. And I'm just going to hot reload here. There we go. So I just did a hot reload. The state of my app didn't change, and I can tap on this now, and I see the value of the climb has been passed to the form correctly. So if I tap on this one, 9-gallon buckets, I see that in my form. If I if I press the floating action button, that creates an empty climb that I can edit. When I hit done, it creates it there. So already we're starting, we've got our form working, we've got editing kind of working, and we're ready to actually add some form features. All right. How's everyone doing so far in the chat? Everyone doing good? All right, seems like things are going well. Any questions so far? Got some questions about the boring show. Everyone's saying hello. Hello, everyone. Okay. All right, so now we want to add a date picker. And this is challenging because Flutter doesn't actually provide a date form field, surprisingly. So this is what we want. We want, next to our text form field, we want a date form field. So we want to do a very similar thing to what we're doing with the text form field. Okay, so what you do in this case is you actually extend this form field class in Flutter. You don't have to do this. You can actually you can actually use composition instead. So I could build a widget that just uses a form field, but in this case, I've chosen to extend it, which is what text form field does. So I'm kind of matching what text form field does here, and what text form field does, for example, is it passes the validator to the parent. We'll see more of that later. And then we've got this builder method, and that's where we actually build the object. So in the builder widget, we're going to add some code, some widgets here to display the date and have them able to tap it. But the important thing is that I want the user to see a date picker when they tap on it. And I want, when they close the date picker, to show that on the form. So how do I do that? Flutter has a method called show date picker, and you pass it in the build context, and you pass in the initial date that you want selected, and you pass it a range, and it shows a date picker for you. When the user is done with the date picker, it's an asynchronous operation. So the user could be viewing this for a very long time. And then once the user is done, this future, this show date picker future completes, and this var new date is populated with a value. So you can think of it, my program actually hangs on this line here where I'm awaiting for the date. And if the user doesn't tap anything, I think the date is null. So the one final thing we want to do here, I've got in my build method a few text elements. You can see I'm putting a label there. I'm showing the date. One final thing that will be important later is we've got this form field state object that is passed to us. So if we go back here, you can see at the very bottom here, we've got this form field state object. That's what we're going to use to, for example, get the build context. It's also what we're going to use to check if there's an error in this form field. So if there's an error, we just want to show a string representing the error. But you could do something much more complicated if you wanted. So let's test that out. So if I go here and I check out step 4 and I hot reload. Okay, so I've got my same state here. If I go to ABC, I've now got this date field, and the date field defaults to today here. I can select a previous date, hit done, and you can see the date was updated. So that is kind of the workflow I want. I want to be able to go here. If I tap on 16 and I hit cancel, I don't want that date object on my climb object to update. Okay, how are we doing, everyone? Does that make sense? I'm getting some thumbs up. That's good. What determines the picker's theme? The theme is set here. So here I'm using an orange color. So for me, the simplest way to set a theme, if you want to change the color here, I always use primary swatch if I'm prototyping, and because primary swatch will affect all the other colors in the app. So if I hot reload this, change it to purple, everything is now purple. And notice when I hot reloaded that, I didn't have to start my app from scratch. I'm still on the same form I was before. Let's change that back to orange. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any new questions, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so the final step for our form, this is just a very simple form today. I want to add some drop-down buttons. We already know how to do this. So we used our text form field. Flutter also provides a drop-down button form field. So here, I want them to select the grade. So I've actually given it a type of grade type. So remember, our grade type is an enumeration or an enum. So by specifying the generic type here, that tells this date button form field what the type of the value is. So I'm saying the type of the value is this enumeration, and the user is going to select either French or Yosemite Decimal System. And I'm using this fancy syntax here. This is a, what this does is it takes the grade type values, it maps them to a drop-down menu item. So now I've taken all the grade types, I've mapped them to a drop-down menu item where the value is the type, which we're saying is grade type up here. And the child or the widget that I want to show is just a text widget. And I'm using this feature in the Flutter SDK called describe enum, and that either prints FR or YDS. Next, we want the user to select the actual grade. So it's a very similar process here. The only difference is I'm taking the list of grades, which I've added a method for here, for that type. And I've mapped it to a drop-down menu item. And I'm using a string here. So I decided not to use some other object because in this case, it was just simpler to have the user select a string. I know all the strings are unique in this case, so it's safe for me to do that. If it's not safe for you to do that, you need to probably use a concrete type like we did with the enumerations. So let's check that out, what that looks like. So if I go to step 5 here, and I save, that performs a hot reload. So now I've got this in my form, and I can see that the grade is Yosemite Decimal System 5.8. If I change the grade type, I've actually added this to the grade type so you can actually change the grade from one to another. So if I want to know what a 5.8 is in the French numerical system, I just select 5.8, click on French, and that changes automatically to the French numerical system. So yeah, any questions in the chat about that? Yes, talking about provider. Yeah, this app doesn't use provider. The reason is I don't need it. So in this case, I've got a page here called the edit climb page. This is my form. This is what we're viewing here. And if I make this bigger, my state management in this case is I'm just passing the climb that I'm wanting to edit to this widget. So in addition to state management, I also think you should think about the API for your widgets. In this case, it's very clear what the API to this edit climb page widget is. The API is you give me a climb and you put me on screen and the user will edit that climb. So in this case, when the user pops the back button, we give it the draft object, and more on that in a bit. Okay, is that making sense so far for everybody? Any questions in the chat? I'm getting some waves. Hi, everybody. Yes, so certainly, yeah, saving data like the form data. Actually, there is a new feature coming into the framework that will allow you to restore the state of widgets. So that's not available yet, but essentially on iOS and Android, the operating system, like iOS, for example, they can actually decide when your app goes out of memory. So if I'm editing this form and I close the app and I don't use it for a long time, my edits to this form could go away because I'm not doing anything as a developer to save that instant state of my form. So there is a new feature coming into the framework called Restore Instant State, which will essentially allow you to say, hey, I want this form restored when the user, or the OS rather, closes the app and opens it back up. So that's a side topic, but yeah, it's very important to make sure that you're saving the right things for the user, because the OS can close your app at any time. All right, we have a question about localization. I recommend checking out the gallery if you want to do localization. They have a much better example than this. Here I'm using raw strings everywhere. That's actually not what you want to do. You want to actually access the localizations for your app using localizations.of, and then find the string that you want to show. Here I'm just using English, which I actually don't recommend. All right, everyone's okay. Things are making sense. Good. Okay, so now we're going to do some more interesting things. So I want to do validation. So I've got the form widget. I've got the form text field, the form date field, and the form dropdown button fields. So in this app, I want to validate that the name is not empty, and I want to validate that the date is not in the future. So how do we do that? So the first step, if you're doing validation, you want to access the state of your form. So we recommend a global key here. So you create this global key in your state, and then you can access it. I'm going to actually show something that I forgot to put in the slides here. So I'm going to go to step 6. All right. So if I go here, you can see I've got the form key, and I pass that form key to my form. So I added this line here. If you don't pass a key, the form will just create its own key and you won't have access to it. So you need to pass it in so that you have a handle to the state of your form. And once you have that, you can do things like this. You can say form key current state validate, and that kicks off validation for your form. So it's going to go through all the form elements in your form, and it's going to call this validate method. So we need to add a validator method. And this is really easy. So if you're using a text form field, it just gives you the value of your field. And you, in this case, you just check if it's empty. If something's not valid, you return a string. If it is valid, you return null. So by returning a string, I'm saying, show this message, something's not right. And the same is true for date form field. So we built this widget from scratch, but we're passing through the validator. So anyone using this widget can pass in a validator. And we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to say, did the user select a date that's after today? If so, we're going to tell them not to do that. So one final thing about this, if I, yeah, so we showed this already. If we're not valid, then we don't want to pop. So I'm just going to return immediately. If it is valid, then we can pop. So what that does, if I save this, so if I go to the app and I click on a climb and I clear out the value. Now I try going back. Oops. Oh, yeah. I try hitting done. That kicks off validation because I added it to my done button. We'll see in the next step how to prevent this problem where I hit the back button and it lets me go back. Maybe that's not a good thing. So we want to ask the user if they want to discard their edits. So you can see what I just did is I cleared out the name, I hit the back button, and I immediately lost all my changes. And as a user, that's not great. So there's this great widget in Flutter called will pop scope. So you can wrap a subtree of your widget with will pop scope, and that gives you a handle to say, should I pop here? So here I'm returning true, meaning, yeah, it's always okay to pop this widget from using the navigator. But we want to do something smarter. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Is there a method to validate one field? That is a good question. I don't think so, because the way forms work is you validate the whole form at once, and that's kind of by design. Yeah, I don't think that is part of this API. Okay, so we've got a will pop scope. And we always want to return true if we want to allow the user to pop at any time. We want to prevent the user from popping this widget off the navigation stack. So the one thing that's important is we had this draft object. So that's the object the actual user is editing on the form. And then we've got the original object that hasn't changed. So we cloned that object up front. So now we can check, does this object equal the other object? One important thing about this that I'll just show is comparing for equality is actually not something you get for free. In this case, I overrode operator equals and I overrode hash code. So if I compare two climb objects and all of their fields are the same, I want the semantics to be such that this object is equal to the other object. So if you've used Java before, this should look very familiar. But this comes in handy when I want to do something like this. I want to just compare, does my draft object equal the original object? The next thing is we just show an alert dialog. So if they aren't equal, meaning the user has made some changes to this object, we want to show an alert dialog and say, do you actually want to discard these changes? So let's see what that looks like. Okay. If I save this here, go back to my form. Now things seem to be working pretty nicely. So I can click on this. I can maybe change this to French, and I hit the back button. It knows that the grade has changed on this climb. So I can hit cancel, which does nothing. It just closes the dialog, or I can hit discard and no harm done. I'm back to the original state. And if I change this to the French system, now it's a 5A. I can see it's showing as 5A there. It's a little small, but yeah, so things seem to be working as you would expect. I can create a new object. I can type in some value, try to hit the back button, and it asks me if I want to discard. So that seems pretty good. And we're reaching the end of the talk. So basically what I want to recap is we took this design, we took this prototype we wanted to build, and we built it. And it really didn't take that long. You could imagine this could be a real app you actually give to people and have them try out, give feedback. And it works on iOS, Android. It should run on web, should run on desktop. And so this process is really powerful. Flutter is really powerful for building prototypes. And the next step, if we were to keep going, which we won't be doing today, is to actually get feedback from real users. So put this on the Android Play Store, put this out there on the web, have people try it out, and just give their initial feedback. And that's the end of the talk. So thank you, everybody. I'll be here for another half hour, I think, to answer questions. I'll be available. So any questions from the audience? Okay, so I've got the slide.do up here.
Yeah. So,
oh,
hey, John.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So yes, we do have questions on Slido, and I'll just go ahead to kind of read out some of the questions that we currently have. Yes, so the first question says that, is there a way to reduce the bulk APK size? Flutter Run generates a bulk APK of over 100 Mbps in my case. Is it possible to integrate Java code within Flutter?
Yeah, this is a tough question. This is not something I've done, but we do have documentation on measuring the APK size at least. So the important thing to realize is that Flutter is embedded in a real Android application. So anything you do in the Android app to reduce the APK size should help. If you're using a lot of plugins or you're using a lot of platform specific code, I would take a look at that and try to figure out, is there something going on in the plugins? Maybe the Dart tools that we use should tree shake, so we shouldn't have large APK code sizes coming from the Flutter code itself. If it's really a tricky issue, I recommend filing an issue on the Flutter SDK issue tracker on GitHub, just to have someone have it tracked and also say, I'm having a problem with the size of my app.
Okay, thank you. I do hope whoever asked that question is listening in.
Yeah.
So the next question, kind of, but I'm sure you can answer. So the next question is, why Flutter?
Why Flutter?
I mean, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, so I certainly think, as I said in the talk, I think prototyping is a really good use case, but it's also used for really big and real apps. So we have a showcase on flutter.dev/showcase. For me, the reason I use Flutter is I do get more impact with it. I get more leverage using Flutter. So I'm able to build things, test things, ship apps with less effort and have more impact that way. So I think, and they're great apps. So the fidelity is there, the performance is there. And with desktop and web coming, it's even more, there's even more opportunities to get projects, get apps in front of people and have them use the apps. So I think as an app development framework, Flutter is my number one choice for that reason.
Great. It has to be anyway.
Yeah.
Next question is an interesting one. Why does Flutter team name this the boring show? Yet the contents of the show are explicitly amazing. Smiley face.
That's a fun question. Yeah, the boring show is great. I think Philip gave a talk explaining why it's called the boring show, but it's about being candid. So it's about like I did in this talk, I kind of glanced over the hard parts. So everyone, there's a certain amount of overhead to building apps that you're always going to get. Like, certain amount of the work is going to be kind of boring, but the other 50% is hopefully really fun and giving you good feedback as you're building it. So I think acknowledging that there's some boring parts to writing software, there's some things that aren't fun sometimes, but hopefully there's also some fun parts and some cool parts. So
yeah, especially when you get to encounter the bugs and you spend hours trying to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, but then once you fix it, it's like a great moment. So
yeah, it's like that moment, like, yes, I've done this.
Yep.
Okay. So the next question, is there a way to validate the form field as you type into the form field without calling the function in the unchanged function, for example?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand the question. So the question is about validating.
Yeah, validating the form field And I think the second part says I have 8 fields which receives different data types. How do I validate each field as the user starts typing? Right, the validate function all.
Right. So how do I call validate? So you could call validate every time the text field changes. We don't recommend that because that would be kind of annoying for users. So in a form, it's actually better to let them try their version and then validate, because otherwise, if you're typing into an app and it's showing all this red warnings, like that's not necessarily what you want. So I think the way the API encourages you to do it that way makes sense. But you could, in theory, call validate on every change, I think.
Yeah. So kind of like from a user experience perspective, doesn't just make sense to just be popping up all the red arrow. Okay. Next question says tips. What are some of the tips that you have to increase performance in a Flutter app, which makes the app run on 60 FPS?
Yeah, great question. So I will give a shout out to Kenzie and Phillips live stream. So the Flutter Day session 2, I would really recommend checking out because they go into detail on how to catch janky frames in your app. So the basic problem that's happening is something in your app is causing a spike or a larger than normal frame. So you can imagine, as I'm editing the app, as I'm doing things, there's new frames happening, and if one frame takes longer than the other frames, then there's kind of a catch up that the framework has to do to get the animation or whatever it is to complete on time. So you can see in the dev tools, like if there's a spike, that's obviously a bad thing, and so you can look at that and figure out, maybe why is there something I'm doing? Maybe I'm trying to do too much layout during this animation. Things like that can help you debug the root of the problem there. And if there's something in the framework that's causing it, certainly file an issue, let us know what you're seeing, and try to show us what you're seeing. So
Okay, great. So the next question says, what is the best plugin to handle web view? I think it meant web view for payment gateways.
Yeah, so I don't know the latest there. There's quite a few. I think there's more than one package on Pub. I would try to search for that. I don't know the answer. I could take a quick look, but I don't know the answer.
Okay, got it. For the next question, I think is an higher specific question. It says, I'm facing an issue on the field. It works fine via Xcode. The command product via Xcode, via Xcode command product archive. So can I work with that? Will it be good enough? Just trying to piece that together.
Yeah, so you're facing an issue on the Flutter build.
View.
I see. So you're running your app from the Xcode editor, right? Okay. So what I would recommend is, unless you have flavors set up or some other thing going on that you want to keep, make sure you commit your changes, obviously, before you do this, but run a Flutter create and then pass the current directory. So Flutter create dot. And what that will do is recreate the iOS project and Android project and web directory in your app if you're using web. I use this a lot if my Xcode gets into a bad state. So it's essentially if you're creating a new Flutter app and it's working, but your old Flutter app isn't working, maybe upgrading those iOS and Android projects will help. So Flutter create dot.
Flutter create that. Thank you. The next question says, how fast do you think Flutter will be in taking up Android 11?
I can't say. I don't know the details about Android 11, to be honest. It should work fine, but we will see.
Okay. So next question, I like how Flutter simplifies and fastens app development. What programs do you have for the local communities in sub-Saharan Africa, such as boot camps?
This would be a question I can't answer. I know that we try to do as much support for the communities. For example, on this call, we try to set up events like this. I don't know specifically about boot camps, but yeah, I think the idea of a boot camp is great. Feel free to reach out with us if you have an idea for something that you want to do, or you need some help in that way, getting a boot camp going or getting a meetup going. Feel free to reach out.
I mean, just to add to that, there are also local Flutter communities around you. Just like was shared during the beginning of this session, this event itself, this meetup itself, is brought together by different communities: Flutter Lagos, Flutter Kisimu. So if there's not one around you, then you should probably reach out to the team and try to start one.
Yep.
So next question: what is the best way to start learning Flutter?
Best way to what? Say it again.
Start learning Flutter.
Oh, start learning Flutter. Go to.
What is the best way to start learning Flutter?
There's lots of great content these days. I think a lot of people like to read. I think it's whatever's best for you. But there's docs on flutter.dev if you're into reading tutorials. We have great code labs right now available that are brand new on the Flutter Day website. So I think that's. Let me get the exact link here, but Flutter Day Code Labs. So it's going to be events.withgoogle.com/flutter-day/code labs. And that's going to give you all of our new code labs as well as some old ones to check out. I really recommend the new code labs. They're pretty cool.
Okay, great. How can we reduce the size of a Flutter component embedded in a native app?
What type of components? Oh.
How can we reduce the size of a Flutter component? Yeah.
Yeah. That is we kind of answered this with the APK size. I will share a link here. So we do have a article on measuring your app size. I will share. I really recommend that guide. If there's details missing from that, feel free to file an issue. But reducing the size is a little tricky because we do rely a lot on the Dart tree shaker. Make sure you're not using a lot of Dart code, or you've got large images, for example, that are too big. Reducing the size of the images, reducing the size of the assets. The Dart code should be fine, but if you're having an issue with that, let us know.
Thank you. Thank you for answering the questions. The next one says that why is text field handling so labor intensive? Meaning focus on field exiting, we have to manually control it. Overall, any advice for making forms more accessible for people with disabilities?
Yeah. So we have a great talk from Flutter Live on accessibility that I will just defer to. I did not prepare any content for that, but as far as the focus management goes, yeah, it can be labor intensive to manage a lot of focus nodes. So we try to make this automatic. So I think if you edit this form app that I built here, and you, for example, build it on the web, you should be able to tab around, hit spacebar to select things. It should be fairly accessible out of the box, but we are very interested if you're someone using this and you're seeing problems with focus and management, we are very interested in hearing about that. That is something that we definitely are working on and improving all the time. Yeah, so I think managing a lot of focus nodes is tough. So if you're doing a lot of that, let us know. We can talk about that.
Okay, great. Next one says that will equality checking be improved in the future?
I don't see it changing. I get the criticism though, because obviously writing an equals method for all my Dart objects, writing a hash code method, it can be kind of boilerplate. The package I used in this example is called Quiver, and there is, I will just grab this here. I don't have my screen share, but Quiver allows you to hash 2, 3, 4, 5 objects together to implement the hash code function for you. And you only need equality and hash code. You only need to override those if you need to. So you don't have to do it for every object, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I think this question has been answered on live. What would you recommend to save data like this form data online, then upload to a server? I think you did answer that on while you were on live. And is there a way to reduce the bulk APK size? I think you also answered that earlier on. So that's the end of the question. Any last minute words for us, John? Before
no last minute words. I think it's really cool that all of you tuned in for the events, for the live streams. I think this meetup is really cool. All these meetups coming together, all these groups. So yeah, this person says, yeah. So I'm really, I think it's really cool that you guys are all contributing, asking questions. Continue to do that. Continue to file issues. Make sure, Flutter works for you. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, and like John says, they're always interested in learning more about some of the awesome stuff that you're working on. So feel free to reach out to your local Flutter community, share what you're working on with the developer relations community in Sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm sure they'll be interested in speaking more with you. Thank you very much, John, for taking time out to spend some time with all of us in Sub-Saharan Africa. We do hope to see you soon. On behalf of all of us, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to do it again. Thanks.